also want to say that I think it's a very good initiative what Bakery is doing. If my figures are right, I think that only 1% of ovarian cancer patients is actually participating at some level to clinical trials. And of course, if we want really to make progress, we should increase these numbers. So I think it's an excellent initiative. It is a pleasure for me to share with you our thoughts on our projects that you've decided to support. I will separate my lecture in 3 parts. Basically, I will give you an overview of the most important research data that we have found during the last years. Secondly, I will give you some pictures from the clinic, from our experience, from what happens into the clinic, and how can we treat cancer patients during pregnancy. And subsequently, we will finalize with what's our project at this stage, what is our goal, who is our group, and which direction do we want to continue. In 2004, the project started with this patient. At that stage, cancer treatment for cervical cancer during pregnancy, that you have to terminate the pregnancy and proceed with surgery or radiotherapy. This was her second pregnancy. She lost her first pregnancy for other reasons, and she realized, well, that this was the last chance to have a baby. And she was actually referred to our center to terminate the pregnancy and to treat cancer. But she came to us and she said, well, I want you to do everything, to explore everything to be able to save the pregnancy. So we did, and as you can see, we successfully did. We are now 6 years further, the mother is fine and the baby is fine, and she received chemotherapy during pregnancy. But this woman actually made us thinking, and actually because we started looking into the literature, and the main conclusion that we had to make is that little information was available and that we should continue into this research field. My first PhD student was Christel van Kalseren, who worked hard on this topic, and she mainly worked on the pharmacokinetics of chemotherapy during pregnancy and of the impact of this on the fetus. And I will summarize these new insights shortly. This slide gives an overview, Journal of Clinical Oncology, which is a major oncology journal. We had data on 175 children, and we looked into the incidence of malformations at birth. And you see in red are the major malformations, 3%, in green, minor malformations. And here we see the different treatment modalities. And what is clear here, that the red ones are mainly in patients that receive no treatment or received surgery. If we focus on the patients with chemotherapy, well, we have some malformations, but this hip subluxation is something which is quite common, and it's unlikely that this is due to chemotherapy. And rectal atresia is also, that's a major malformation, but it's not an uncommon one. So the conclusion here is, if you give chemotherapy after the first trimester, this does not increase or lead to malformations at birth. Subsequently, and at the stage that we started, there were no data, or very small data, and not well powered, that would indicate what percentage of chemotherapy goes to the fetus. What about the transplacental transport? And we have done that on animal models. Of course, you can't do it in human setting, so we thought that the best model was in baboons in Kenya. So even despite, in 2008, the problems we had in Kenya, our researchers were there doing research on pregnant baboons. So we put them asleep, and we gave the pregnant baboon chemotherapy, and we did a photosynthesis of the fetus to see how much chemotherapy was really going into the fetus. And these are really unique data. And this slide summarizes basically the data from these experiments. And what is important, so here we see mouse transfer, and this is baboon. So this was done in Kenya. For doxorubicin, only 7% is going to the fetus, iberubicin 4%, platin nearly 60%, and this was the highest level. Paclitaxel is actually not, or nearly hardly crossing the placenta. The active compound of cyclophosphamide, 25%, and vinblastine, 18%. So the main, and these are all drugs that are most commonly used during pregnancy, because it's mainly breast cancer and hematologic cancers, and all these drugs actually are used for breast and or hematologic cancers. And the main conclusion here is that the placenta in all cases is a filters the drugs, and in some cases really actually hardly fetal concentrations are detectable. Even now people do not want to give paclitaxel, which is a really important drug, because there are no data, but we can show that actually it is supposed to be safe to give a pregnant woman one of these important cytotoxic treatments. So this is, according to us, an important clinical finding. Many of you are working with drugs, and we know that the physiology of a pregnant woman changes, that her plasma volume is changing, that her kidney function is changing, and we expect an increased metabolism. But up till our study, there were no data on what about chemotherapy during pregnancy. And these are the first data. And so this, here we see all the pharmacokinetic parameters. We see the drugs that have been tested here. This is a summary of 5 pregnant patients, 2 control patients, 2 pregnant patients, 2 controls, 7 pregnant patients received doxorubicin, 5 controls, and here 4. And what we see, actually the hypothesis is confirmed that in all pregnant patients there is an increased clearance, there is an increased distribution volume, and the result, the Cmax is lower and the area under the curve is also lower. So, well, we still have to continue with that, to confirm that, and to see what is the clinical consequence of that, but at least it's an important finding. Very important is, what about the children? How is the outcome of the children that were in utero exposed to chemotherapy? This is the first interim analysis. We are doing now the second one, but I do not have all the data yet, but at this stage I can say that we will confirm these data. So this relates to 64 children, and in our study they are examined at birth and at standardized ages, 18 months, 5 to 6 years, 8 to 9 years, 11 to 12, and later on. And depending on the age, they get an adapted examination, adapted according to their age. If we look to the neurological examination at birth, 90% had a normal outcome, 6% hypotonia, 1 child had the contractures of the right arm, but this child was a severely preterm born baby, and there was 1 child with myoclonia. If you present these figures to a pediatrician or neonatologist, they will say this is normal, this is what you would expect in a normal population. We examined the children at 18 months, and there the mean score was actually the same as what you would expect in a normal population. If we then look at all the children and we look to their intelligence, we look to their behavioral tests, we look to their memory tests, these figures are normal. There was 1 problem, and that was in the attention test, the go, no, go task. What we see with these children is that if they have to do something, they do it quicker, and as a result they make more mistakes. But this you also see with preterm born babies. This you see with mothers that were exposed to high stress, maternal stress. That gives you the same outcome. So at this stage, the question is this now related to chemotherapy, or is this related to preterm birth, or is this related to maternal stress? So that's why we need to continue the research. If I say that there is a difference, then this is a difference in lab conditions. If you put 10 children on a row and 2 received chemotherapy, you will be unable to identify these 2 children. So we should make clear that this is under lab conditions and when they are examined in a standardized way. So at this stage we are examining or analyzing, working on an analysis of 70 children who are older than 18 months. So that's already starts to become a significant group, but we can confirm these findings. If we look into the clinic, we have to look into to identify 3 periods in pregnancy. The first part is the implantation period, and if you give chemotherapy or radiotherapy, either your pregnancy will be normal, so this is the old phenomenon, or it will be a miscarriage, because these cells are omnipotent. If some cells are necrotic because of toxicity, all the other omnipotent cells can compensate. And Whereas if too many cells are deleted, then you have miscarriage. This period is the organogenesis. That means that all the organs are formed, and we should try to prevent chemotherapy or radiotherapy during that period. But once this period is over, organs are formed and they just continue to grow, basically. And then it appears that it's less dangerous to treat cancer during pregnancy. And during a consensus meeting, we actually agreed that it should be safe, taking into consideration a safety period of 2 to 4 weeks, to start chemotherapy from 12 to 14 weeks on. Just to illustrate that we want to share our ideas within international consensus meetings, we publish them. This is the first consensus meeting on gynecological cancer. In January last year, you can also see a very international group, and we also published, and this is the second recommendations that we want to present to clinicians in order to help them to treat these cancer patients. Some pictures from the clinic. Due to pregnancy, and especially in breast cancer, patients are more likely to be advanced stage disease because of the physiological alterations. It is sometimes more difficult to identify a breast cancer. We can operate during pregnancy. It is very important to look into maternal oxygenation, good pressure, and if the mother is fine, then the baby will also be fine. But if the pregnancy is advanced enough, we can continue to monitor the patients, the fetus here, and the contractions of the womb. If contractions occur, we can start giving medications in order to prevent preterm delivery. What you can see here, it's not so clear, but actually normally you have much more variability. So while the mother is sleeping, in fact, one sees that the baby is also sleeping. But you can monitor all this. But it's possible to operate during pregnancy. This is also illustrated in this case. This is a patient that was referred after our first successful case. We see here the pregnant womb. And this is the cervix. This is the tumor, which is in this case superficially infiltrating the cervix. And after doing a pelvic lymphadenectomy, we have done a conization and removed the tumor. Also, this patient is currently well, as well as the baby.